25 tons. That is how much gold one man is said to have received in a single year. Not over a lifetime, not across a dynasty, in 12 months. And according to the account that describes it, this happened roughly 3,000 years ago, in a kingdom roughly the size of New Jersey. The number is so large that for over a century, explorers, archaeologists, geologists, and at least one increasingly desperate German cartographer have tried to find out where it actually came from. Most of them failed. One of them died trying. His name was Solomon, and what you are about to discover is not a story about whether his wealth was real. It is a story about something stranger. A wealth so well documented, so specifically described, that it created a 150-year-old treasure hunt across 2 continents, and to this day, nobody has definitively found the source. First, you need to understand what the ancient text actually claims, because the scale of it is almost impossible to process in modern terms. According to the Book of Kings, Solomon ruled Israel for 40 years, beginning sometime in the 10th century BCE. During his reign, the text states that the weight of gold that came to him in a single year amounted to 666 talents. A talent in that era weighed somewhere between 66 and 76 pounds. That means Solomon's annual gold income in just one category of income was somewhere around 25 tons. Today, that quantity of gold would be worth more than $200 million at current prices simply for the metal itself, with no accounting for its historical scarcity. And that 25 tons was not his entire wealth. It was just what came in through one channel, separate from trading profits, separate from tribute, separate from what merchants and foreign kings brought him as gifts. The text goes further. It says silver became so common in Jerusalem that it was treated like stone, not valuable, not rare, common. His throne was overlaid in gold. His drinking vessels were gold. None of his cups were silver, the text specifies, because silver had become beneath him. He kept 200 large shields and 300 smaller ones, all covered in beaten gold, displayed in a building called the House of the Forest of Lebanon, essentially for the purpose of being looked at. And historians who study ancient economies point out that this was not entirely unprecedented. Egyptian pharaohs centuries earlier had also recorded staggering quantities of gold flowing into their temples. King Asorkon I of Egypt is recorded as having gifted roughly 380 tons of gold and silver combined to various temples in a single inscription. So Solomon's numbers, while extraordinary, were not impossible by the standards of how ancient Near Eastern monarchs documented and displayed wealth. The real question was never whether ancient kings could possess this much gold. It was where Solomon's gold specifically came from. And this is where the story stops being about ancient scripture and starts being about an obsession that gripped the modern world. The biblical text mentions a place called Ophir. Ships sailed there, the account says, and returned with gold, silver, ivory, and exotic animals including apes and peacocks. Ophir is mentioned by name multiple times, and critically, the text never says where it is. No coordinates, no neighboring kingdom, no trade route description detailed enough to pin it down. Just a name, attached to staggering wealth, floating in the historical record with no fixed location. And for nearly 2,000 years, that ambiguity sat largely unexamined. Then in the 19th century, as European explorers pushed into Africa and the Middle East and began documenting ancient ruins they didn't fully understand, the question of Ophir's location exploded into public obsession. In 1871, a German geologist named Karl Mauch trekked into what is now Zimbabwe and encountered the ruins of a massive stone complex, now known as Great Zimbabwe. Mauch, working with limited evidence and an enormous amount of enthusiasm, declared that he had found the source of Solomon's gold. He cited a wooden lintel in one of the structures that he believed was cedar, the same wood Solomon was said to have imported from Lebanon for his temple. He concluded the entire complex must have been built by ancient visitors connected to Solomon's biblical kingdom. He was wrong. Modern archaeology has firmly established that Great Zimbabwe was built by Bantu-speaking Africans, the ancestors of the Shona people. Starting around the 11th century, roughly 2,000 years after Solomon's reign would have ended. The lintel wasn't cedar. The civilization wasn't connected to ancient Israel in any way archaeology has ever confirmed. But Mauch's claim did something extraordinary. It became famous. Newspapers across Europe ran the story. And in 1885, a British writer named H. Rider Haggard, who had spent years in southern Africa and was deeply familiar with both Mauch's claims and the mineral wealth being extracted from the region during the era's gold rushes, published a novel called King Solomon's Mines. It became one of the best-selling adventure novels of the 19th century. It is widely credited as the book that essentially invented the Lost World genre. The literary literary ancestor of everything from Indiana Jones to Jurassic Park. The novel was fiction, but it cemented something in the public imagination that has never fully gone away. The idea that somewhere hidden in the unexplored corners of the world sat the actual source of Solomon's actual gold, waiting to be found by whoever was brave enough or clever enough to locate it. Karl Mauck did not get to enjoy his fame. Despite his discovery making international headlines, he had no formal academic credentials and could not secure a university or museum position. He eventually found work as a foreman in a cement factory in Germany. His health declined. Shortly before his 38th birthday, he fell from a first-floor window while sleeping. He died days later. The man who claimed to have found Solomon's mines died in obscurity, having gained nothing from the discovery except a footnote in the very legend he helped create. The hunt did not stop with him. In the 1930s, an American rabbi and archaeologist named Nelson Glueck explored the Arabah Valley, a desert rift running between the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, straddling the modern border of Israel and Jordan. He documented extensive ancient copper mining operations throughout the region and announced with considerable confidence that he had located the actual source of Solomon's mineral wealth. For decades, the scholarly consensus shifted against him. Many archaeologists argued that the kingdoms of David and Solomon, if they existed at the scale described in scripture at all, were too small and too disorganized to have operated industrial mining at this level. Glueck, according to several historians who studied the controversy, became something close to a laughingstock in serious academic circles. Then the evidence started catching up to him. In 2009, researchers excavating a site in Israel's Timnah Valley known as Slaves Hill uncovered preserved 3,000-year-old animal dung in a fortified mining camp. Analysis dated the site precisely to the 10th century BCE, exactly the era in which Solomon is said to have reigned. Archaeologist Erez Ben Yosef of Tel Aviv University has led much of this excavation. The site reveals a heavily fortified, highly organized industrial copper smelting operation, the kind of infrastructure that requires centralized authority and significant manpower to construct and maintain. But here's the detail that complicates everything. The leading archaeological theory now suggests this mining operation was most likely controlled not by Solomon's kingdom of Israel, but by the Edomites, a rival group the Bible repeatedly describes as enemies and antagonists of Israel. If the Edomites controlled the mines, the only way Solomon's kingdom benefits is if his armies, as scripture claims they did, conquered Edomite territory and extracted tribute. The fortified walls discovered around the smelting camp suggest the site was, at some point, a genuine military target. Whether that military pressure came from Solomon's forces specifically remains, in the words of archaeologists working the site today, one of the most actively debated questions in biblical archaeology. And there is one more wrinkle that almost nobody outside specialist circles knows. The mines at Timnah and the surrounding region were producing copper, not gold. The biblical descriptions of Solomon's wealth center overwhelmingly on gold and silver. Copper, while economically significant in the ancient world and almost certainly a real source of royal revenue, does not explain where the gold specifically came from. Some researchers have proposed Saudi Arabia as a candidate, pointing to an ancient mine called Mahd ad-Dahab, whose name literally translates to cradle of gold, located between Mecca and Medina. American and Saudi geological surveys in the 1970s suggested the site could plausibly be the historical location of Ophir. The claim has never been confirmed. Like every other candidate before it, it remains a strong guess dressed up as a discovery. This is the part of the story that should genuinely surprise you. After roughly 150 years of expeditions, excavations, a best-selling novel, multiple competing scholarly theories, and at least one man's death, nobody has produced definitive proof of where Solomon's gold actually originated. Not Great Zimbabwe, not the Arabah Valley, not Saudi Arabia. Every candidate has compelling circumstantial evidence and a fatal unresolved problem. So why does this story matter to you sitting here in the present with no plans to excavate a desert mining camps? Because it reveals something about how civilizations remember wealth versus how they remember its source. Solomon's gold was recorded obsessively. Its weight, its uses, its visual impact on people who witnessed it firsthand, like the Queen of Sheba, who according to the text was rendered nearly speechless by what she saw. But the supply chain behind that wealth, the actual mines, the actual laborers, the actual logistics of moving 25 tons of gold a year across ancient trade routes was never considered important enough to record with the same precision. The result and the spectacle survived in extraordinary detail. The infrastructure and the process disappeared almost entirely. This is not unique to Solomon. It is something close to a universal pattern in how wealth gets remembered throughout history. People document the gold. People rarely document the mine. You live in a world obsessed with seeing the result, the number in the account, the lifestyle, the display. But the actual mechanism that produced any fortune, ancient or modern, is almost always less visible, less glamorous, and far more interesting than the gold itself ever was. 3,000 years after Solomon's reign, his gold has been gone for so long that scholars debate whether the Babylonians melted it down, the Egyptians absorbed it through tribute, or it simply scattered into trade networks too vast to trace. But the question of where it came from is still alive, still being excavated, still occasionally claiming a career, or in one 19th century geologist's case, a life. The throne is gone, the temple is gone, the shields, the cups, the 25 tons a year, all of it is gone. What remains is the question, and the question, it turns out, may be worth more than the gold ever was.
If this changed the way you think about money, there's someone else in history who will change it again. Subscribe. I'll find them for you.